Everybody, welcome to another episode of the Under the Hood podcast. This is your co-host Tim Douglas, and today on the show we have Luni Libes, who is the CEO of Africa Eats. Luni, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Tim.
Of course, of course. Thanks for coming on the show. And we'd like to jump right in. We always like to start with hearing a bit more about your journey. So yeah, if you could start with just telling us how you got into the financial space, how you got into what you do, that'd be great.
Oh boy, it's a long story. All the white hair. I started as an entrepreneur. I started my first company at the age of 22 in 1992. Self-funded company. Then it was angel backed. I had VCs knocking at the door back in '92, pre dot-com bubble. I'd say what got me into the financial space was that companies 2, 3, 4, and 5 were all backed by California VCs. So I got to learn the VC model, the stuff you read about in the stories, watch it on the movies. I got to learn that by flying down to California, pitching the VCs down there, having them fly up here. I'm based in Seattle. And somebody said yes for each of those companies or more than one. And many of them were themselves entrepreneurial VCs, as in they were first funds, if not first checks. And over the course of board meetings and dinners and whatnot, I asked them a lot of questions. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you running a company? How does your business model actually work? Like, why are you investing in this company? And so I learned it from the opposite side of the table. And then in 2012, started my first fund.
There we go. So I guess you liked what you heard when you asked those questions.
Well, that's a great question, because no, I would say that the VC model is highly flawed. That everything I've been doing since 2012 has been in homage to what they do, but not what they do.
Okay, so kind of give us some context on the VC model for those who don't know, and then tell us how yours is differentiated.
Okay, so the core piece of the VC model is, of course, to find great companies, invest in them, and make tons of money. Underneath that, if you tear back a layer, you'll find that each fund, no matter what the size of the fund is, 100 million, $10 billion, anything in between, each fund is going to make 15 to 20. Each fund is going to invest in 15 to 20 companies. They're going to do it in multiple rounds. A round is between 12 and 18 months apart. So they'll make 3 or 4 checks to each company that's succeeding. But in total portfolio size, 15-ish, 16, 17, 20 is a pretty big fund. And out of those bets, if 1 out of 10 succeeds, the fund does well. So they're making, 15, 20 bets. 1 or 2 of them are going to hit it big. 3 or 4 are going to do okay. Everything else is going to crash and burn. They're fine with that. They think that's good. They think that's success, right? Right. When they have that one big winner that's 20 times, 30 times, 40 times what they paid for it, like, they celebrate that. That's it. They're done. They're happy. Ignoring the fact that 14 to 19 companies failed on them, and and they'll say, well, that's just the business. And so, first and foremost, that's the problem I have with VCs, which is I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a self-identified entrepreneur. Still am an entrepreneur, and I have no desire to see 19 out of 20 companies fail.
Yeah, I gotcha. And so, would you say you're differentiated in that not only do you not want to see the companies fail, and you're not okay with that kind of structure, but are you more hands-on with the companies to make sure they're not failing, or how do you kind of go
Yeah,
about it?
exactly. So how we get to Africa Eats is in 2012, I started a business accelerator. So, they're absolutely everywhere now. We don't think twice about them now. In 2012, they were still pretty new. Techstars and Y Combinator were 6 years old. They had run less than 10 sessions each. It was still unknown whether that model was going to work. But nonetheless, I started one of those. I just started it for mission-driven companies instead of tech companies, expecting that most of mine would succeed instead of most of them fail. And more than half have succeeded. So got closer to the right model. And because of that, because I came into the financial space, and we invested in all of the ones we invited. Like, so all of a sudden, I'm a fund manager. But I'm a fund manager whose job it is to help these companies with their business plans, help these companies with their first customers, like help these companies become real companies, as opposed to pouring large sums of money in them, hoping that they get really big really fast. Um, so all of the companies that I worked with between 2012 and now, I met them all first and foremost because they were seeking help and guidance. Right? Yeah, they wanted money, but they all the entrepreneurs that came to me knew that they needed more help than just money. And so, my attitude toward them and my relationship with them is help first, money second, not the other way around.
Mm, I like that. I like that a lot. And do you have a specialization in how you help? Like, are you more on the finance side, the marketing side, the sales side? Are you like, I run the full gamut
No,
because
I'm
I,
an entrepreneur, which means you got to be a generalist. So whatever help they need, will provide. If it's not I don't have specialty. I am a generalist. But if it's something I know someone can help them with better, I'll connect them to someone else. Like there's a lot of connection in the work of helping entrepreneurs. Half the work is providing them the answer. Half the work is providing them a connection to someone who has the answer, and half the work is connecting them to each other. And yes, on purpose, that's more than
that's
100%.
150% of work right there.
Yeah, it overlaps. It overlaps.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, tell us a bit more about why you went with companies focused on impact and how that has kind of played out over the years.
Okay, so I was a tech entrepreneur, software entrepreneur. I started software companies. No knowledge that for profits could do any impact in the world. Like that was just a foreign concept. Um, there really weren't a whole lot of companies to point to back in the early 2000s or late 90s that were impactful and for profits. Um, and I woke up one day and I realized that something was odd in my career. I woke up in, let's just call it 2010. Uh, almost 20 years into my career. And I had four companies that were still running. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I would start them up. I would hand them off to my co-founders and do the next one. I think 4 years apart, not like every year. Um, and that's not normal. Like serial entrepreneurs are not that uncommon. Entrepreneurs in general are uncommon. Serial entrepreneurs are happen, but having multiple companies not crash and burn is not common. And I didn't know what the difference. I had no idea why this was true. So and none of them had hit it big yet. So a normal path is you have a big exit, you become an angel, you become a VC. Like that's how you give back or paid forward. But I hadn't had that happen yet. That was a few years later. Um, so I was trying to find some place to help entrepreneurs. And 2010 was a little early for that. I don't think Techstars made it to Seattle yet. I think it was the next year. Startup Weekend hadn't got started yet, or if it did, it was still like a little tiny program in Boulder. Um, a lot of the pieces that we just take for granted today as entrepreneurship support just didn't happen yet. It just that burst of entrepreneurial spirit hadn't happened yet. And so I was searching around for someplace. I discovered a business school on Bainbridge Island, Washington, which is a little bedroom community. There's no campuses out here in Bainbridge Island. So I was really confused on where this school was. I looked it up. It was at a nature retreat. Um, and it was a executive MBA program taught on weekends once a month. So I thought, okay, that makes sense. So why don't I just reach out and see if this business school could use an entrepreneur hanging around? So I reached out. I didn't know anyone there. LinkedIn and connections, and everybody was 3 degrees away or more. Um, and they invited me to the open house, and I showed up and I said, "Hey, here's my story. I'm an entrepreneur. Can I help?" And they said, and I quote, "I'm sure we can find something for you to do." So they said, come next month. We meet once a month. This is March of 2011. Come and sit in the back of the entrepreneurship class. Do whatever you want. Like help the students. We don't any way you think is best. And I did that for for months. But your question was, how did I get into impact? How did I get into this idea of mission driven for profits? Well, not I wasn't looking for this, but it turned out that this school, it was called Bainbridge Graduate Institute back then. Turns out this was the first school to teach how to do good in the world using the tools of a business school. How to use for-profit capitalism to solve the problems of the world. And it seeped in. And so, and literally they said, sit in the classroom. So I just went to all the different classes. I just didn't go to the entrepreneurship class. When that one was done, it wasn't yet time to go home. So I just went to a different class and sat in the back of that classroom and helped out with that classroom. Because again, I'm an entrepreneur. I can sit in the finance class and help teach finance, and I can sit in the back of the management class and talk about management and so forth. So I did that. And then there were classes that where I just got to learn, sustainable food systems. And so, I did that for 9 months. My fifth software company, we merged it with another startup and we moved it to New York. I did not want to go to New York. So I was redundant in that merger. And I couldn't do another software company. At that point, I didn't even realize it, but I just sat back and go, what am I going to do next? No desire whatsoever to do a software company. I had to do something impactful. So I decided then to build a business accelerator for the entrepreneurs who were like the ones I was teaching in the school. And in some cases, for those entrepreneurs to help them create real companies after they graduated. So that's how Fledge started. And then in 2020, to get back to Africa Eats, which was the intro company, we had invested as Fledge in over 100 companies in 40 countries around the world. All sorts of things, doing all sorts of impacts. All continents but Africa. Sorry, but Australia. And we had a whole pile of companies from Africa, and they needed more guidance. They needed more funding. So I created Africa Eats as a spinoff of Fledge to go and help those companies scale up.
There we go. Well, talk to us a bit about the question lingering in everybody's mind right now. Can you actually take a for-profit company and extract profit from a situation where you are also impacting people kind of positively, or solving a problem that is also at the like core of humanity, like poverty and homelessness, where there doesn't seem to be a ton of value to extract? Talk to us about how that
Oh, yeah.
happens.
It's actually really easy. It's so easy. It should be done by everyone every day. I don't know why it isn't. All right. So at Africa Eats, we talk about solving hunger and poverty, right? The number 2 and number 1 sustainable development goals by the UN. Right. And clearly, it's hard to come up with a problem that's bigger than poverty. And it's hard to argue that hunger, if you can't solve hunger, you can't solve anything else. Okay, so what does that look like in the African context? There are, for most listeners probably don't know, there's 1.4 billion people who live in the continent of Africa. So I love this stat because there's 1.4 billion people in India, there's 1.4 billion people in China. The other 1.4 billion in a place, not a country, is the African continent. One of the differences between those three spots is Africa imports food. It's not a geography that feeds itself. It is a geography that grows enough food to feed probably 2 billion people, but 40% of it gets lost on the way to a fork. It never makes it from the farm to the fork. We have issues in this country, but it's always almost always post fork, post plate. All right, so the problem, we call that post harvest losses. So there's food that's grown, but food doesn't get to a hungry person. Therefore, people go hungry. Hundreds of millions of people will not eat 3 meals today, or 2 meals, whatever their culture wants. And the countries have to import food from U.S., Brazil, Australia, and elsewhere, which is money they don't have, because these are countries that don't have a surplus of funds. But that's not how I go to poverty. On the poverty side, most of the people living on the continent of Africa, half of them are kids, and of the half that are adults, most of them are farmers. like 3/4 or so. Um, Usually about an acre of land, and almost always just the food they're growing is eaten by themselves and their families. And then in a really good harvest, they'll bring some to the market and sell it there. But all their neighbors had a good harvest too, because then the weather was good, and so they're just selling to their neighbors, food in abundance. And when there's a bad season, there isn't enough food because everyone's having a bad season, right? And there's some food moved around, but insufficient amounts. So how do you solve hunger and poverty? Well, you solve hunger by getting rid of post-harvest losses. So I'll give you the business model for that in a second. And how do you solve poverty? Well, you invest in companies that buy from farmers. So when you buy from a farmer, you increase the income of the farmer. You give them a steady income, right? There's usually 2 or 3 seasons a year. So they're getting payments 2 or 3 times a year, typically double what they would earn if they're just selling this little surplus, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times, but enough to put them as the median income in their country. Like, and so I don't want to call that middle class because that makes you feel like you have a house and a fridge and a TV and whatnot. But median income, so better than subsistence farming, and then that's enough to get on a path where those farmers can then invest in more things like chickens to lay eggs or pigs or something that produces even more income. Right. All right. So can this work as a for-profit? Yeah, absolutely. So let's take an example from Tanzania. It's a country the size of California in East Africa, just south of Kenya, north of Mozambique. It's on the coast. It's like 60 million people live there. Um, there's a woman I found in the end of 2019. She had started working about she was about 2 years into her company. She had found, let's call it 250 women farmers outside the city of Arusha, which is I don't know, third or fourth biggest city in the country. Not in the city, but she was working outside the city. In the culture in that part of Tanzania, women earn zero income. So this is not uncommon. There's a lot of subcultures in Africa where the women are expected to work on their husband's farm. The women are expected to bring the product to market, but the men get all the money. That's just how the culture works. So here's a bunch of women with no money of their own, no land of their own, no assets of their own. And she said, well, this is silly. We need to create an income for these women. So what we're going to do is we're going to find them some land and rent it for them. We're going to give them the seeds to plant, just in this case, maize, corn. We're going to teach them how to grow it efficiently. We'll give them the fertilizers and whatnot to do that. They'll put in all the labor, and then we'll buy all the outputs from them at a discount so that we can get back the cost we gave them. And then we're going to mill it up as what's called maize flour. We would call it cornmeal here, and just sell it in bags. And so year one, she did $11,000 of business. Year two, she did 24,000. And this is literally, paying the farmers for their work. Therefore, they now have an income. I don't exactly know I don't remember what that income was, but $500-ish a year, maybe $700 a year. Again, that's about a median income in Tanzania. It's not a lot of money, right? $2 a day, $3 a day. But it was better than $0 a day. And when I talked to her and I asked her, how do we scale this up? She said, we make breakfast cereal. She said, what I really want to do is I want to make porridge and breakfast cereal from this maize because the value of that is so much higher than just cornmeal. And so we funded that as Africa Eats. Last year, she did $1.4 million in business. 4 years later. All those women are still selling to us and more. We're aggregating from aggregators now. We need so much maize flour. And this is, enriched breakfast cereal. So there is some wheat and soy mixed in as well. And it's somewhat baby food, somewhat human food. Yeah, it's working. So there you go. It's a for-profit company making a profit, earning over $1 million a year now. And it is literally funding hundreds or small thousands of farmers' incomes simply by buying what they were already making.
Okay. So let me recap to make sure I understood this example.
Yep.
So there was a bunch of women farmers who didn't have an income because in that culture, men kind of they worked on their husbands'
The
farms.
husbands get the money for the work. Yeah.
Yep. So then she leased out land, or she got land, leased it to them,
Yeah.
gave them the seeds, taught them how to farm. Then they farmed. Then she bought the crops from them and sold them with a margin. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Hmm.
And then to increase that margin, made breakfast cereal, and that's how she's gotten to 1.4 million over the past 4 years. You said
Yeah. 4 years.
that's
Yeah.
epic.
Okay. And then if we want to make it even more impressive, we did all that on, let's just call it less than $300,000 of investment capital.
Wow.
So again, if we jump back to the VC model, they would have, if they thought this was a good idea, which they would never have invested in anything like this, but if they had seen something that they liked from an entrepreneur they liked, Series A would have been, $5 million, and this company would have burned through that, and then 18 months later would have gotten $15 million and burned through that. And someday, 3-4 years down the line, it might make $1 million, but it would have burned 20 million doing it. Yeah. Instead, we built a real business making real profits on $300,000.
That really is amazing. That
Yeah,
really
that's
is
one
amazing.
example. We have 21 companies in our portfolio. They're not all like that. That's the second fastest growing company I think we've had in the portfolio, but the easiest one to explain.
And so,
To your
can people just go read about all 21 of these companies, or how do they get more information about what you guys are doing at Africa?
Yeah, two good ways. You can to africaeats.com. We have a blog. You can read about these. There's a portfolio link at the top where you can see the whole list and click in and get details. And we have a YouTube channel. So we're YouTube. We're at Africa Eats at YouTube, and you can actually have a virtual site visit. So we just visited that company last month, and there's a little 12-minute video showing off the breakfast cereal production line. And we visited two other companies, or yeah, two other companies while we're in Tanzania.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And so, are there any kind of new risks that you had to take into account when you took on the kind of impact investing model, or is it just like analyzing any other business?
I expected it would be a lot different, but no, business is business. So that the trick is you only invest in companies where the impact is embedded in the business. Like the product or service has to create the impact, not something separate. So a good example of that is Ben and Jerry's ice cream. For years and years, people pointed to Ben and Jerry's as a great impactful company. Okay, where's the impact? It's not obvious. There's two places where it shows up. One is slightly embedded. One is that they only buy local. So all the milk products are local to them in Vermont. So that's impactful to Vermont. It's not impactful to me out here in Washington State. But the other one, which is more that they're touted about, is they give 15% of their profits to charity. Okay, that's nice, but that's not in that 15% number can change. The board can decide that this year it's going to be 12, or this year we're going to drop it to 10. Like that's just a board decision, as opposed to no, this company Golden Pot, the breakfast cereal company, yeah, they buy from smallholder farmers. That's who they buy from. There really aren't choices to buy commercial scale farming in Tanzania anyway. But they're going to buy from smallholder farmers. Their money, all that income they generate, is going to create incomes. Oh, and by the way, what's the post harvest losses at Golden Pot? Yeah, near zero, right? Because we bought the food from the farmers, and if we lose any food on the way from there to our production facility, we lose profits. So we don't lose much of it. Versus the original supply chain that would have existed if somebody had started breakfast cereal years ago, there would have been like 4 or 5 middlemen between those farmers and the factory.
I see. I see. 4 or 5 middlemen. Like, is it still like that? Like 4 or 5 middlemen, not for this particular company, but
Yeah,
for
yeah,
other.
yeah, it's ubiquitous. So I say no one buys the outputs, but when there's a good harvest, some guy comes around and buys food in the villages, right, at a very low price because there's a lot of food around. And we're talking like half of what we're paying. And then he generally is a local guy with no vehicles, so he'll hire a guy with a truck to come and bring his food to a town. And now he has an aggregate amount of food. He has a truckload worth of food in bags. Everything's done in bags. And then what does he do? Well, yeah, he knows other middlemen who pick up in towns and bring to small cities. And then they know middlemen that pick up in the small cities and bring to the big cities. And then finally we're at the aggregator of aggregator of aggregators who buys and then turns it into a product. Right. And just because we're one step, but we're not selling retail. Our guys are selling to retailers. So we are middlemen. But we're the one middleman generally between the farm and the retail.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
so everybody's got to have a markup, right? Literally, like the normal middleman is paying a low price because he's got to mark it up and to make a profit, and then the next guy's got to mark it up to make a profit. And every time you do this, you're paying also the guy with the truck to move it around, as opposed to owning your logistics fleet, which is a lot more efficient. So yeah, we're sending a truck to a aggregation center, picking it up, bringing the food to the big city, and processing it,
There we go.
or cleaning it and selling it in some cases.
Do you guys have plans for the kind of middleman infrastructure throughout the rest of the country as you scale up? Is that part of the
Our companies generally become logistics companies. There's one that grew faster. We had one entrepreneur who runs a meat processing company in Rwanda. And in the lockdowns in 2020, he decided to start a food and ag logistics company. So he did that, and he bootstrapped it for 2 years. Barely ever even talked to us about it. He just said, "Yeah, yeah, it's fine." Um, and then we finally funded it in the beginning of 2022. And it's literally just a fleet of refrigerated trucks and cold storage units, and it just picks up food and drops it off. He's in Rwanda. That's a little bit to the left, a little bit west of Tanzania. It's inland. It's landlocked, and so to feed that country, again, because of post-harvest losses, not because they don't grow enough food, um, but to feed that country, there's food shipped in from all over the place, including the ports on the Indian Ocean, but including all the neighboring countries. So his trucks are driving all over Eastern Africa. His trucks sometimes leave and don't come back for 10 days, like just to go pick up a load or drop off a load. Um, and yeah, he grew from nothing to $6 million in 4 years in
wow.
revenues.
I just feel like with the logistics being such a problem, I'm surprised something hasn't come up and scaled and just taken that whole kind of
It's
market
really
share.
hard. You talk about finance. There's a lot of things we take for granted as Americans. I'm presuming you're American.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you've ever bought a car, like here's a great example. You've gone into the dealer, a new car. You got into the dealer, you did your test drive, you saw the price, you started negotiating, you got through all that mess of negotiating. You get to the very end of the process. You have you have agreed upon price there. What's the next thing they do? They say, well, are you gonna pay cash? You need a loan, or you want to lease? Like you're not done. You think you're done, but there's one more layer, which is finance. How are you going to pay for this car right now? Right. And there's a whole system set up for that. And the same thing's true when a company goes to buy a truck in the US. Okay. You negotiate your price, and then how are you going to get this truck? And for all of you who've done a car lease or car loan, you could also walk into your bank and say, I'm going to go car shopping tomorrow. Can I get pre-approved for a car loan? Right? It's competitive. It's not just that the dealer can do this, but every single bank around you will also do this for you. Right? Yeah. None of that is true in Africa. None. So if you want to buy a truck, if you're a company and wants to buy a truck in Africa, the question is, what's the price? And then pay me. That's your only choice. There's no loan option. You can't go to a bank. You can't go to the dealer to get a loan, and there's no lease option. So why is there a lack of logistics companies in Africa and transport in general? Yeah, because there you can't create a large logistics company unless you bring in money from elsewhere.
Mm, that does make a lot of sense, and I was overlooking that 1000%.
Yeah, yeah. No, I would tell you, I did not know this in 2020. I had hints of it, but now I know it really well. And I do know that at some scale, you can get some financing, but at a pretty high rate and not at the scale you need to build a logistics company.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Well, this was very insightful. I was going to ask a few questions about actually evaluating impact because I feel like I've heard a lot of companies talk about how they're impact investments or something like that, but it's the hey, we donate X% of our profits. But this is like, no, the product. It's like we are paying X amount of farmers every couple months for their crop, and that's
Well,
doing this for
you
them.
can do pretty simple. You can, if you have the financials from a company, you can see what their net margins are, right? So if they're making, and well, I'm in food, so 15% net margins is good. So okay, that means 85% of the money that came in from customers went out as something else. The cost of employment, the cost of salaries in Africa is really small compared to here. So it didn't go to most of that did not go into the hands of the workers at the company. Some of it did, like a small sliver went, and some of it went to fuel to move the food around, right? And some of it went to other things you need to run a business. But the vast majority of that money went in the hands of the farmers. Full stop. Right? And you can it's more than half and less than 85%. So, you know, call it 2/3 and be done. And there's your measure. So we literally, our system is how many farmers did we buy food from this year collectively across our portfolio? That's it. We don't try and calculate how much per farmer, just how many farmers in total. And we found that it's getting harder and harder to do that because we're growing so fast. Our companies are growing so fast that they are having to buy from aggregators now. So we don't know, but the number's in the hundreds of thousands, right? If you count all the people working on that farm, right, the kids and the wife, or the spouse or whatever, yeah, it's over 1 million people are earning money from this work.
There we go. I love it. Well, I feel like I have a very kind of clear synopsis of A, that one case study, and B, it sounds like you're doing this around 21 companies or through 21 companies. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
So
I
so
love
like
it.
16 or 17 had that same model. We're going to buy from hundreds or thousands of farmers. All right, different kinds of products. It could be potatoes or bananas or chickens. It can be animal products as well. Same thing. Double the income of the farmers and make lives better.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything you feel like you want to touch on more? I feel like I've kind of hit my questions around kind of the measurement around impact investing, what it is specifically that you guys do. And I really liked that insight into how much we take finance for granted as well. I was going to ask something about what are some of the unforeseen benefits of impact investing, if there are any there that you've experienced.
I just think most people just don't know this is even possible. Again, told you my story. I didn't know this was possible. Right, that was 12 years ago, but it was only 12 years ago. Most people that don't have just never heard these kind of stories before. So yeah, it makes you rethink like any investment you make, any all your stock portfolio in the public markets here. It's like, okay, well, what impact are those companies having? Um, and yeah, you'll see this more and more. Like the ESG thing is kind of touching upon it, but not real. Like these are companies that are actually doing some good in the world, and they'll scale up and they'll become investable, publicly investable products sooner than later.
And so Africa Eats is a fund that you're eventually trying to take public, but how can people invest now?
Yeah, so it's not a fund; it's a company, right? On purpose, because there's other issues around the VC model we won't get into today. It is a privately held company at the moment. We had done last 2 years ago. We did a WeFunder campaign. So if you go to wefunder.com and search for Africa Eats, you will find that. And we're planning on another one in a month or so. So we're planning on opening that up. So that would be open to any American that would like to invest. And then ultimately, we are working on a project to make Africa Eats a publicly listed company in Africa, including a app that any American could download and trade shares. So just like Robinhood, but for not just Africa Eats, but for Golden Pot, it's on our list of companies to take public, and some other companies. Not all 21 yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah. And do they need to be accredited? Are there minimums for those kind of shares?
So WeFunder is open to any American. Minimum investment's $100. And when we're public, no, anybody who wants, just download the app. Anyone with a smartphone.
Sounds good. Well, Looney, I think that's all we have for you, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me here.
And we already said where people can go to find you. Is it
AfricaEats.com.
AfricaEats.com? Sounds good. Well, guys, thank you for watching. If you loved what Looney had to say, make sure to go to AfricaEats.com. That will be down in the show notes. Connect with him, read more about the company, and check it out. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys on the next one.